What'd she tell you, bud? I looked at Deeza Malone and figured I'd never see her again in my life, so I kept shooting off my mouth. She would tell me every night before I went to sleep that no matter what happened, I could sleep knowing that there had never been a little boy anywhere, anytime, who was loved more than she loved me. She told me that as long as I remembered that, I'd be okay. And you knew it was the truth, just as much as I know my name's Bud, not Buddy, she said. Don't you have no other kin here in Flint? No. I guess I can't blame you for wanting to ride the rails. My mama says these poor kids on the rails, all alone, are like dust in the wind. But I guess you're different, aren't you, Bud? I guess you sort of carry your family around inside of you, huh? I guess I do, inside my suitcase, too, she said. So you've been staying in an orphanage since your mama died? What makes you say that? Well, you're kind of skinny, but I can tell by the way you walk and the way you act that you haven't been out on the road for very long. You still look young. I said, shucks, I'm not all that young. I'm going to be 11 on November 14th, and I'm not skinny, I'm wiry. Some folks think I'm a hero. So, Mr. Hero, we're the same age, but you have been staying in an orphanage. I've been staying in a home. My daddy says being on the road ain't fit for a dog, much less a kid. How come you don't just go back to your orphanage? She started up touching my hand too much again. Deeza Malone seemed like she was all right, so I came clean with her. Don't tell no one, but I lit out from a foster home, so I'm on the lam. And I wouldn't go back to the home even if I could. It's getting so there's too many kids in there. So, that's better than being cold and hungry all the time and dodging the railroad police. What do you mean? You don't think they just let people jump on the trains, do you? Well, I guess I hadn't thought about it. See, I knew you were too nice to have been out on the road. You're going to have a bad surprise tomorrow morning. That won't bother me too much, she said. Oh, yeah, I forgot. You're a hero to some folks. When Deeza smiled, a little dimple jumped up in her brown cheek. I didn't answer. I just kept drying tin cans. We got to the last 4 or 5 tin can plates, and Deeza said, "You ever kiss a girl at the orphanage?" Uh-oh. Are you kidding? No, why? You afraid of girls? You must be kidding. She said, okay, and closed her eyes and mushed her lips up and leaned close to me. Dang! If I didn't kiss her, she'd think I was scared of girls. If I did kiss her, she might blab, or Bugs might see me and tell strangers about what happened. I looked down the creek to where Bugs and the other boy were still splashing in the water. It was dark enough that I didn't think they could see us too good. I scooched my lips up and mashed my face on Deeza Malone's. We stuck like that for a hot second, but it felt like a long time. When I opened my eyes and pulled back, Deeza kept her eyes closed and smiled. She looked down and stuck her hand in mine again, and this time I let her keep it there. She looked out at the creek and the woods on the other side and said, "Isn't this romantic?" I looked out to see what she was talking about. The only thing I could see was the moon like a big egg yolk way up in the sky. You could hear the water and the sound of the mouth organ man playing a sad song back in Hooverville. I sneaked another peek at Deese's dimple. She said, "You hear that? That's Shenandoah. He's playing. Isn't it pretty? I guess so. Do you know the words?" Uh-uh. Listen. It's been 7 long years since last I've seen her. Way he, you rollin' river. Been 7 long years since last I've seen her. Way he, I'm bound away. Cross the wide Misso Ray. I said, "Yep, that's a sad song." I didn't think it was pretty at all. She squeezed my hand and said, "Isn't it? It's about an Indian man and woman who can't see each other for 7 years. But in all that time, they still stay in love. No matter what happens. It reminds me of my mother and father. Your dad's been gone for 7 years before?" She looked out over the creek like the big, eggy moon had her hypnotized. I pulled my hand from hers and said, "Well, that's just about it for the dishes." She smiled again. "But I'll never forget this night." I didn't tell her, but I probably wouldn't forget it either. I'd practiced on the back of my hand before, but this was the first time I'd ever busted slob with a real live girl. We loaded all the dishes in the box and walked down to Bugs and the other kid. We put their dishes on top of ours and headed back. Bug said, "How come you're looking so strange, Bud? You look like you've been chunked in the head with a rock." Deeza Malone laughed, and for a second I thought she was going to rat me out. I said, "I don't know. I guess that song is making me kind of sad." Bug said, "Yeah, it is kind of sad." Right before we got into the cardboard jungle, we passed the white people with the coffin baby at their own little fire. I said to Deeza, "How come they're all off alone? They aren't allowed to sit around the big fire because that baby's making so much noise?" Deeza said, "Uh-uh. They've been invited, but my daddy said you got to feel sorry for them. All they're eating is dandelion green soup. They're broke, their clothes are all falling off of them. They're sick babies. But when someone took them some food and blankets, the man said, "Thank you very much, but we're white people. We ain't in need of a handout." When we got back to the main fire of Hooverville, we put the dishes in another box. Diza made us turn them all upside down so if the rain got into them, they wouldn't rust. I went to the woman with my suitcase. It was in the same spot I'd left it, and the knots in the twine were in the kind I tie. I said, "Thank you very much, ma'am." She said, "I told you not to worry." I went back to the big fire to sit with Bugs. The mouth organ man said, "I suppose you boys are going out on the train tomorrow." I said, "The one for Chicago, sir?" He said, "That's the one." I said, "Yes, we are, sir." He said, "Well, you'd best get as much sleep as you can. It's supposed to be pulling out at 5:15, but you never know with these freights." We got in one of the shacks with some other boys. Bugs was snoring in 2 seconds, but I couldn't sleep. I opened my jackknife and put it under my blanket. I was thinking, Jesus' mama was right. Someone who doesn't know who their family is like dust blowing around in a storm. They don't really belong any one place. I started wondering if going to California was the right thing to do. I might not know who my family was, but I knew they were out there somewhere, and it seemed to make a whole lot more sense to think they were somewhere around Flint instead of out west. I opened my suitcase to get my blanket. Even though I trusted the woman who'd guarded it for me, I checked to make sure everything was okay. I picked up the tobacco pouch that had my rocks in it. I pulled the drawstring open. I shook the 5 smooth stones out and looked at them. They'd been in the drawer after the ambulance took Mama away, and I'd had them ever since. Someone had took a pen or something and had written on all 5 of them, but it was written a code, so I couldn't understand what they meant. One of them said, "Kentland ill, 5:10:11." Another said, "Luguti in 5:16:11." Then there was Sturgis M, 8:30:12, and Gary Inn, 6:13:12, and the last one said Flint M, 8:11:11. I put them back in their pouch and pulled the string tight. Then I pulled out the envelope that had the picture of my saggy pony the Miss B Gotten Moon Park. It was fine. Next, I counted the flyers again. All 5 were there. I slid all of them back except for the blue one. I held it up so it could catch some of the light from the big fire. I kept looking at the picture and wondering why this one bothered Mama so much. The more I thought about it, the more I knew this man just had to be my father. Why else would Mama keep these? I used a little trick to help me fall off to sleep. I pulled my blanket right over my head and breathed in a smell real deep. After doing this 3 times, the smells of the shack in Hooverville were gone, and only the smell of the blanket was in my nose. And that smell always reminded me of Mama and how she used to read me to sleep every night. I took 2 more breaths and pretended I was hearing Mama's reading to me about the billy goat's gruff, or the fox in the grapes, or the dog that saw his reflection in the water, or some other story she'd checked out of the library. I could hear Mama's voice getting farther and farther away as I imagined I was in the story until finally her voice and the story all mixed into one. I had learned that it was best to be asleep before Mama finished the story because if she got done and I was still awake, she'd always tell me what the story was about. I never told Mama, but that always ruined the fun of the story. Shucks, here I was thinking I was just hearing something funny about a fox or a dog, and Mama spoilt it by telling me they were really lessons about not being greedy or not wishing for things I could have had. I took 2 more breaths and started thinking about the little hen that baked the bread. I heard, "Not I," said the pig. "Not I," said the goat. "Not I," said the big bad wolf. Then whoop, zoop, sloop, I was asleep. I started dreaming about the man with the giant fiddle. He was walking away and I kept calling him, but he couldn't look back. Then the dream got a lot better. I turned away from where Herman E. Calloway was, and there stood Deeza Malone. I told her I really liked her dimples. She laughed and said, "See you in 7 years." A man screamed, "Get up! They're trying to sneak it out early." I jumped straight up and banged my head on the top of the shack. I ran outside. It was still dark and the fire was just a pile of glowing sticks. The man was screaming at the top of his lungs, "Get up! They fired the engine and we're fixing to take off." Bugs and the other boys came and stood next to me. Bugs said, "Is it a raid?" Someone said, "No, they're trying to sneak out before we get up." People started running all over Hooverville. Bugs said, "Come on, Bud, get your stuff. We got to get on that train." I folded my blanket up and put it in my suitcase and tied the twine back. I put my jackknife in my pocket, and Bugs and I ran outside. I hadn't got 6 giant steps away when a boy stuck his head out of the door and yelled, "Hey, Slim, is this your paper?" I looked back. My blue flyer. I forgot to put it in back in my suitcase. Bugs said, "Hurry, I'll wait. I'll catch you. Go ahead." I ran back and took my flyer from the boy. "Thanks a lot." I ran back out into the crowd that was tearing through the woods. There were a million boys and men running in the same direction. I didn't want to fold the flyer up, so I was running. I slid it between the twine and the suitcase. I'd put it back inside once we got on the train. No one was talking. All you could hear were the sounds of a million feet smacking on the trail and the sound of a million people trying to catch their breath. Finally, a hiss sound started getting louder and louder, and I knew we weren't too far away. We broke out of the woods, and there in the dark sat the train. The locomotive was hissing and spitting coal black smoke into the sky. Every once in a while, and a big shower of sparks would blow out from inside the dark cloud, making it look like a gigantic black genie was trying to raise up out of the smokestack. The train went as far back as you could see. There must have been 1,000 boxcars, but everyone had stopped and was just standing there watching. No one was trying to get on. I pushed my way to the front to see if I could find Bugs, and I saw why everyone had stopped. There were 4 cop cars and 8 cops standing between the crowd and the train. The cops all had billy clubs and were spread out to protect the train. The crowd kept getting bigger and bigger. One of the cops yelled, "You men know you can't get on this train. Just go on back to Shantytown, and there won't be no trouble." A white man said, "This is the only train going west for the next month. You know we got families to feed, and you have got to be on it. You go get back in your cars, and you'll be right. There won't be no trouble." The cop said, I'm warning you. The Flint police are on their way. This here is private property, and they have orders to shoot anyone who tries to get on this train." A man next to me said, "I'd rather be shot than sit around and watch my kids go hungry." The cop said, "This is America, boys. You're sounding like a bunch of commies. You know I can't let you on this train. I got kids to feed too, and I'd lose my job." Someone yelled, "Well, welcome to the club, brother." It seemed like we stood looking at the cops and them looking at us for a whole hour. Our side was getting bigger and bigger, and the other cops started looking nervous. The one who was doing all the talking saw them fidgeting and said, hold steady, men." One of the cops said, "Jake, there's 400 men out there and more coming. I don't like these odds. Mr. Pinkerton ain't paying me enough to do this." He threw his cop hat and his billy club on the ground. Everybody froze when the train whistle blew one last time and the engine started saying, "Shh, shh, shh." The big steel wheels creaked a couple of times, then started moving. 4 of the other cops threw their hats and billy clubs down too. The boss cop said, "You lily livered rats," and was like someone said, "On your mark, get set, go." The engine was saying, "Shh, shh, 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 shh," and a million boys and men broke for the train. I got pushed from behind and fell on top of my suitcase. Someone reached down and pulled me up. I squeezed my bag to my stomach and ran. The train was going faster and faster. People were jumping on and reaching back to help others. I finally got on the tracks and was running as hard as I could. I looked up into the boxcar and saw Bugs. He screamed, "Bud, throw your bag! Throw me your bag!" I used both hands to throw my suitcase at the train. Bugs caught it, and when he set it behind him on the blue flyer blew out of the twine and fluttered outside the door. But it was like a miracle. The flyer flipped over 3 times and landed right in my hand. I slowed down and put it in my pocket. Bugs reached one arm out and screamed, "Bud, don't stop, run." I started running again, but it felt like my legs were gone. The car with Bugs in it was getting farther and farther away. Finally, I stopped. Bugs was leaning out of the door and stopped reaching back for me. He waved and disappeared in the box court. A second later, my suitcase came flying out of the door. I walked over to where it landed and picked it up. Man, this was one tough suitcase. You couldn't even tell what it had been through. It still looked exactly the same.